What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I'm coming at you with an updated tier list for Darkwing Blast release. I said I was going to do one once the set dropped, but besides Darkwing Blast, we also just recently had YCS Utrecht, and there's a lot of things that actually shifted in the meta in a short period of time, so this tier list definitely needs to be updated, talking about a lot of the decks and where their position is in the meta, and of course a lot of new decks and old decks with a bunch of support that really shifts things up. And I just want to talk about where I place the decks currently in the current format, talk about them a little bit. Before we get into this tier list, I do want to let you guys know, Discord link down below along with all of our other social media links. Also, if you do enjoy this type of Yu-Gi-Oh content and you like what you see here, feel free to thumbs up the video and subscribe. It really helps me out and what I do here on the channel. And without further ado, let's get into tiering some decks. So we have tier 1, tier 1.5, tier 2, rogue, and needs some help. This is like a little different than how I normally tier it. I added 1.5 because I feel like there is definitely, especially this meta, a 1.5 that differentiates 2 and 1, where 1 is usually the best deck or the best 2 decks. I'm gonna go over the decks that either haven't changed much or aren't doing anything relatively quickly, as to make this video not 30 minutes long. So things like Phantom Knights I won't be talking about super long because their position in the meta didn't really change. They didn't really get anything. So yeah, let's start tiering these decks. So we're going to have ABC Therion. I'm going to put this in Rogue. I think it's like solid, but it's definitely not doing anything right now. But I don't think the deck's super weak. Phantom Knights, again, I'm going to put in Rogue. I've said it a lot, like I think this deck is solid, but it's just not, it is definitely not tier 2, but it's still like a solid option you can play with really good things that answer the meta. Fogblade is always just a solid card. Burning Abyss, I'm going to put in needs some help. I think Beatrice just needs to go to 3. I don't understand why Beatrice isn't at 3 already. Like, we're not afraid of Burning Abyss, are we? I think Beatrice needs to go to 3. Even then, I think it won't be Rogue, but it will help it out a little bit. But Burning Abyss is going to be a need some help. Pendulums, are they in need some help or Rogue? Like, you could put them here and say they really need Electromite, but giving them Electromite might put them much higher up. I'm going to put them in Rogue. I think Pendulum is not bad. I think every time I see it play, it definitely has some good things it can go for. It struggles a little bit going second, but overall, I'm pretty confident putting this in Rogue over needs some help. Plunder Patrol, I'm going to put in Rogue as well. I think this deck is super solid. Nothing in the Brave Engine got hit. So, like, the Brave Engine helped this deck so much, and I think honestly, once they get their new ship, that new ship they get in, I think, Photon Hypernova, it's going to be really good. Maybe we can even see them go to tier 2. I really love this deck, and I have a lot of faith in it. Heroes, I'm actually going to put in tier 2, which might be a bit of a hot take. I feel almost like they're better than Rogue. Like, the regional I went to in Mississippi, we had a Hero top 8. Hero has been doing kind of good in a lot of different events, not amazing at the high tier events. But I think this deck has a lot of potential that people are kind of sleeping on. You know, they're, for the first time in a while, I think maybe the first time ever, they have 3 Hero Lives and 3 Fusion Destiny. Darklaw lines up amazing in the current meta. I think DPE is like still a good card, even though it doesn't line up great into the tier matchup. I think people are truly sleeping on this deck. I think it's a lot better than people are even trying it for. Yeah, I mean, like, its only argument is that Nib is in the format, kind of. I always feel like Nibiru in the last couple months since Power of the Elements has been in a spot of it's either like the best hand trap for 2 weeks and then it's like the worst hand traps for 2 weeks, and it really has shifted a lot in recent times. But I'm gonna put Hero in tier 2. DDD, I'm gonna put in Rogue. Definitely a solid combo deck. I mean, again, it's solid but not crazy. Despia, I'm gonna put in solid tier 2. This deck consistently like actually gets regional tops, and I believe it top 64'd at YCS Utrecht. I think 1 was in there, pure branded Despia. So if you're talking about branded Despia, definitely tier 2. If you're talking about Despia with tier elements, I think you could still argue it for this position, maybe 1.5. But like Despia itself as either like an engine or, you know, as a deck, I think it's floating somewhere around here. I'm going to put it in tier 2 though. Dinomorphia, I'm going to put in Rogue. I think this deck is decently solid. It's not amazing. It just has a problem with like the tier limit field spell. It has a huge problem with runic cards. Oh my goodness, it has a problem with runic cards. Along with Dinosaur, both of these decks, they really need Misk to 3, that or they just need to find like a meta where they're really good. Dinos aren't terrible, I think they're fine. Therion strategies, honestly, like Therion tier elements has been picking up some steam. I'm willing to put this in tier 2. I don't even know if Therion Tier Limits runs the field spell. I've seen almost no lists. I've just heard people testing it in the works. I heard it topped at Utrecht, but I haven't personally seen the lists. But seeing success and people talking about it, I kind of want to put it in tier 2. Honestly, I'm going to put Dragon Maid and Rogue. I almost want to put them in tier 2. Dragon Maid actually got huge support in Darkwing Blast in the form of the Byssted cards. So I know like a lot of people see Dragon Maid and they consider them, like, people who don't know much about Dragon Maid think of them like as a joke archetype because they don't see them do well. But honestly, they got a huge wave of support in Darkwing Blast, and honestly, we see it top in the OCG. Like, I remember it getting a top 8 at a couple of tournaments recently, I'm pretty sure. And that is, like, in the midst of a very powerful format. Like, Dragon Maid is pretty good with the Byssted cards, and I'm willing to put it in Rogue. Dragoon strategies, I mean, I'm gonna put this in... just hasn't been doing anything recently. Like, Dark Magician or Dragoon strategies, I'll put in Rogue. Eldritch, you know what? After Darkwing Blast, I want to put Eldritch in Rogue. The Byssted cards are Eldritch's worst nightmare. Like, it took, like, the biggest hit for no reason. I think Byssted is really what is changing some of the things on this tier list. A lot of things get hurt randomly by Byssted, even though it's not really directed at them. It's directed at, like, tier limits. A lot of things get hurt by the Byssted archetype. Eldritch is one of them. You essentially always have to save Sanguine now, and that's really awkward. Yeah, I'm really concerned for our Golden Lord here with the new Byssted cards. Flaunderies, ooh, are they tier 1 or 1.5? I'm gonna put them in 1.5. I think this deck is super solid. It always performs solid. I don't really have much else to say. Nothing's really changed about this deck. It's just really solid, really strong, and fits nicely in the meta. I'm gonna kind of put Exosister in the same vein here. Say they're a tier 1.5 deck. They really match up nicely into the tier limit matchups that are very popular. Obviously, the recent YCS, we saw Sprite really take a hold in the meta. That is not a great matchup for Exosister. Like, it's not abysmal, right? Like, if you set up Magnifica plus Returnia, that's like really solid and you can really get some work in there, but it's doing that through hand traps, which might be falling out of favor. It's kind of hard to tell with the recent YCS when hand traps did not look popular at all. But Exosister do really well when there's no hand traps and they can set up Magnifica Returnia, and they're also pretty good in the current meta, so I'm willing to put them in 1.5. Drytron, recently, in my last tier list, you'd find this up here. This deck, in my opinion, took a gargantuan hit by the Byssted cards coming out. Byssted, like, one Crow was tough for Drytron. Like, if you had Crow plus any other hand trap, they probably weren't playing. Now your opponent just opens up like 3 DD Crows with the Byssted engine, and it's like, how do you justify playing Drytron in a format with Byssted? It seems so hard. Or Bystial, I keep saying Byssted, but some people will know it as Bystial now. Yeah, I feel like Drytron took a huge hit. I'm gonna put them in Rogue. Its strength when it plays will still be like up here, right? But I feel like Drytron is really gonna fall off as Byssted sees popularity. If Byssted for some reason isn't popular, Drytron can definitely find itself up in tier 2. But yeah, with the recent Byssted release, I'm going to put Drytron down here. Faker, it's okay. We're going to put it in Rogue. I think Faker is fine right now. Libromancer, I'm going to put it needs some help. Honestly, I haven't seen this deck do almost anything since our Nationals format. I have not even seen like people talk about this deck. So Harpies are in need some help. They just need like a new support card. Like the new Dragon is really cool for them. It definitely helps Harpy ladies, and like they're okay with a Tri-Brigade engine as well. That being said, they're definitely not a rogue contender this format. They need some more support cards. Earth Machine, I think this deck is like solid. I'm gonna put it in Rogue. I think I had it in tier 2 last time. Or maybe I still had it in like the upper echelon of Rogue. I just haven't seen it do anything recently, so I'm willing to put it lower on the tier list, but it's a deck that doesn't get hurt by any of the new support. In fact, you can play it with Vernisylphs that help it, but I don't think bump it up a tier, so I'm going to put Earth Machine in Rogue. Adignister, what do I feel about Adignister? It's solid Rogue, or is it tier 2? No, I'm going to put it in Rogue. Like, a lot of people have been running Underworld Goddess recently, which really hurts this deck. I don't think this deck's bad, but we're finding a lot of decks this meta be Rogue because obviously there are some much more powerful decks in the format. You know, we're gonna put Alistair in Rogue. They got 3 Nadir serving again, which is cool. Like, you could technically play Alistair stuff. Maybe it needs some help though. It's somewhere here. I just feel like Alistair isn't that weak of a deck, surprisingly. It's just so outclassed by what's above it. There's no reason to play it, but you really don't see Alistair at all, so I'm gonna put it needs some help. You do not see this engine anywhere anymore. It just doesn't exist. Like, I haven't seen Alistair played in anything since our Nationals format, and maybe even before that a little bit, so I'm gonna put it needs some help. Tri Brigade, I'm gonna put in tier 2. I've been testing a lot with Tri Brigade Sprite, especially after Darkwing Blast. I think this deck is like low-key potentially going to find its way up here. I think there are some things happening with this deck that are amazing, especially with the use of Sprind and Nibble Angler, and of course Nimble Beaver, who is a beast. I really like what this deck can do. It's weak to Shifter, but it's like not weak to the Byssted that much, and it does some really solid things. I'm actually really enjoying Tri Brigade Sprite, and I think this deck is like extremely solid right now, and I'm personally doing a lot of testing with it behind the scenes. Prank Kids needs some help. I mean, as long as Meow is banned, it seems like this deck just will not function as it should. Okay, here's one I really want to talk about. Labyrinth. Labyrinth is interesting. I'm still testing it. I'm testing around with it, but with Reboot gone and like sort of how our format's shaping up, part of me is like really hopeful for this deck, potentially in tier 2. I'm gonna put it in Rogue. I think no one is going to play this deck. I'm definitely putting in Rogue, but I am going to be playing a lot of it. The testing seems really good. There's a lot of really cool cards. One thing different between our Labyrinth and the OCGs is the fact that we got Daruma Cannon, which is a card that seems almost tailor-made for Labyrinth, and I think is going to help this deck a lot. And the way our format's shaping up, I think this deck can do some really good things. So I'm going to put it in Rogue, but it could be like up here. I don't want to say that confidently, but I have a lot of faith in Labyrinth. Madolche just got huge support as well. They got the Vernisylph, which got the duck that released. Vernisylph is going to be talked more of like an engine in this deck, and Naturia, which is further down on the tier list. Yeah, I think Madolche are really solid, but still just Rogue. I feel like they just need a couple more cards, because sometimes they just have so much engine that only leads to a Glass Souffle and a Promenade, and that really bothers me. But yeah, the deck is definitely better now, and with the duck, and I'm really excited to try this too. Mathmech, oh my goodness. I'm going to put Mathmech in Rogue. So this is going to look so strange because Mathmech has been doing so good. Ever since Power of the Elements, Mathmech has been up here, 1.5, maybe 2. The deck has been so solid. Why is it suddenly in Rogue? Sort of the same reason for Drytron and Eldritch. The Byssted cards dominate Mathmech. They are so bad for Mathmech because now, like on Circular's effect, they can hit Sigma, which in some hands is good. It's not what I'd recommend all the time. But just on their Super Factorial, like they activate Super Factorial target 3, you Byssted banish the Diameter. Now they just get an Alimbertion Search. What used to be like a negate and a send in multiple places is now maybe an Alimbertion Search. If you set up 2 Diameter, you still get a negate and an Alimbertion Search. But that's like nothing compared to what it is. Like your opponent is getting free bodies while you're getting less than you used to. And I feel like Mathmech is going to take a huge dip in success. That being said, this is all contingent on how well the Byssted cards do, so that is a big elephant in the room, is how well they perform in our meta. I think they're going to be phenomenal, with Tier being one of the best decks, but if we see Sprite just be dominant this meta, maybe people won't be on the Byssted stuff as much. And if people aren't on Byssted, I would say Mathmech are Tier 2, but this is, again, contingent entirely on the Bystial archetype. So right now, I'm going to put them in Rogue. I think they're going to fall off really, really hard. But again, definitely potentially a tier 2 deck. Sky Striker, I'm gonna put it in Rogue. It's been solid Rogue for a while. You know, funny enough, Byssted hurts this deck too. Like, I need to make a whole video about the Bystial cards because they really just dominate so many decks for no reason. I really hate that they were printed, but yeah, this is a deck that's decently solid. It's soon to get linkage, but that's not for right now in this tier list. That will be a future tier list. Rika, I'm gonna put in tier 2. Definitely think it's a solid deck. It hasn't been hit by anything. It's just as solid as it was before. The more people shift away from hand traps as well, the better this deck gets, because this deck doesn't lose to board breakers. It's a little weak to hand traps, but I think this deck's solid. One did top Utrecht as well, so I'm still fine putting Rika here. Emancipator probably needs some help. Yeah, you just don't see this deck do much. Technically, people do run like Gigantic in this deck, and it got support and Power of the Elements. In theory, with that little rock lizard as well. But no one's playing Emancipator. I think it needs some help. That is not Block Dragon. We're never bringing Block Dragon back. But this deck needs some help. Runic, sheesh, that's a tier 1 deck right there. Runic is in so many different decks. Like, this is in Sprite, this is in some variants of tier, it's a pure deck, it has spell books as a variant, which that wouldn't be a tier 1 version, but Runic, even if you don't consider it a deck with Mystic Mine in itself, which it is, but like, as an engine, this is a beyond tier 1 engine in my opinion. Runic is definitely a big threat in this current format, almost no matter what you're pairing it with, so yeah. Salad needs some help, and it doesn't even need, like, I mean, Gazelle off the list would help it, but honestly, like, the other Cyburst decks have sort of crept this. Like, I feel like 3 Gazelle in Salad still wouldn't be as good as Marincess, wouldn't be as good as Mathmech's Full Potential. It's like a solid deck, but it really is just getting outclassed. Maybe it's time for Gazelle to come back to 3 and we can test it, but it definitely needs some help. Shark, I think, is Rogue. I actually think this deck's pretty nice in the Rogue category. It does some nice things. Kragan plus Gozen is still disgusting. Along with just having like multiple Toads still, being able to do some really cool stuff, and being able to make Dweller in the way it does is very nice. I think this deck is decently solid in a Rogue category. I think Weather Painter's a Rogue. No one plays this deck, but it can play Skill Drain, D-Shifter, Necro Valley, I'm pretty sure. It just plays every nasty card in the game that can net you free wins. Its engine is a little slow, but once it's rolling, it has a really, you know, snowball effect, and they can play some disgusting cards. So I think Weather Painter's pretty good. Sprite, I'm going to put in tier 1 with the YCS Utrecht having just happened. You know, previously, when the first sign of the ban list came out, my thought was definitely 1.5 or 2, and I think I put it there. It's definitely proven itself. I didn't think it was, like, dead like some people thought, but I didn't think it was going to be as good as it is, but we definitely tinkered with the deck. People have found that, you know, Runic Sprite is still solid. I personally was, like, playing Evil Twin Sprite for a while, and it was seeming solid. But yeah, I think you can confidently say it's in tier 1 now. We're not ranking that. These are not here. Sword Soul, definitely a tier 2. It still does consistently okay. It is like just solid. It topped YCS Utrecht, I'm pretty sure. I think there was one. Could be wrong. It tops regionals every now and then. So if you're able to still top consistently at the regional level, I think you're tier 2 or high rogue, and I'm willing to put Sword Soul here. Tier Elements, still tier 1. This deck is nasty. This deck is as good as it's been. It only got better after Darkwing Blast, so yeah, I mean, this deck went from really strong to stronger, so I think tier Elements, I would still personally say are the best deck despite what happened at YCS Utrecht, because obviously YCS Utrecht is not post Darkwing Blast. It is part of what's leading into our next format, but yeah, I think tier Elements still super strong. Dragon Link, I'm going to put in 1.5. I have seen Byssted Dragon Link go insane recently. A lot of people are definitely on this deck. It's been kind of under the radar, like maybe you haven't seen people talking about Dragon Link too much, but yeah, people are definitely talking about this deck. This deck is phenomenal with the Bestial cards. So yeah, Trap Tricks, I'm going to currently put in Need Some Help, just because we know help is on the way. Like, you could argue it's Rogue, but we know the structure deck's coming, and I'm so excited for that structure deck. I'm hoping one day I can just put Trap Tricks up here after the structure deck. I highly doubt that will happen. But for now, we're going to put Need Some Help. Evil Twin Sprite, I mean, like, yeah, we're going to put them. Honestly, like, I don't even want to rate the Trouble Sunny picture because Evil Twins aren't a deck, but Evil Twin Sprite is pretty good. Marincess I'll put in tier 2. I think this should be, like, the best Cyburst deck we have now. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Bestial won't be popular, and then Mathmech will be the best Cyburst deck still. But I'm willing to put Marincess up here because, personally, I think they're the best Cyburst deck, and yeah, I think this deck's still really, really solid despite its lack in play, so. Kairushin, I'm going to put in Rogue. We actually saw it do okay at the recent YCS. I think this deck is fine. It's not amazing. Maybe it needs some help, but I'll put it in Rogue. Agents, they just got support, but honestly, they need some help. Virtual World, they need some help, to be honest. Maybe they're Rogue? I don't know. You can't really bring anything. I'll put them in Rogue. They're okay. Punk, Pure Punk I'll put in Rogue as well. I don't think this deck's that bad. I know it hasn't seen any play, but honestly, I would still put it in the Rogue category. It's I think maybe better than Need Some Help. Zombies, I'd say they're Rogue. Gren Maju and like really hard go second strategies, I would say Rogue. Yeah, I mean, nothing really changed with a lot of these. Maybe Zombies actually got a lot weaker with the Bestial cards, but overall, I think I'd put Zombie here still. Infernity. Infernity is interesting because we got a TCG exclusive that actually really helps Infernities. It's Salamander Catalyzer. The card is insane for Infernities. I've been testing it a little bit. And they also got Zelantis. They got 2 brand new cards from Darkwing Blast that really help them be much better than they were in the past. That being said, need some help. The Byssted cards also came out, which completely shut down the deck. I think with the support they got in Darkwing Blast, and if Byssted sort of leave the meta, if we get 3 Archfiend, this is going to actually be a threat once again. I mean, this deck could find itself in tier 2 or high rogue if we get 3 Archfiend again. Right now, the deck is struggling to Byssted, so despite the new support, I'm still going to put it needs some help. Spellbook, I'll say our rogue. I've definitely seen them do some things, and I want to test it more personally, but I think I've seen Spellbook Runic actually be pretty decent, so yep. Cyber Dragon, I'll put in needs some help. People always ask me to rank this deck, and I hate to put this is a lot of people's favorite deck, and I hate to put it in a category that's not great, but like, it's just not great, so that's where we're at. Paleo tier, I'm going to put in tier 2. I recently got 2nd place at a regional with this deck. I said I thought it was solid. It's definitely proving itself to be solid. It's doing actually pretty decent, even at the YCS level, where I think at Utrecht it did okay. You know, after Darkwing Blast, I think this deck actually gets a lot better because of the new support, but not as much as like pure tier. So I think it's maybe like there's less reason to run it than there was just a couple weeks ago, but yeah, I still think it's pretty solid. B Trooper needs some help. I mean, it's an okay deck. It's not amazing. The new ninja stuff I have almost no testing with, but I want to say it's rogue just because at least at the start of, you know, Darkwing Blast format, people should be trying it, experimenting with it. Maybe eventually it'll find itself and need some help, but for now I'm going to put it in a preemptive rogue. I don't know enough about the deck to really give good explanations here, but I want to have hope in the new archetype and the support for ninjas. Naturia, very interesting. I'm going to put it in rogue initially. I think this deck's super strong. Maybe it's tier 2. I think you could argue tier 2. Like, we're in some of the newer decks now. I've seen this deck do so well in the OCG, and I do think the deck is strong. That being said, maybe I'll just put it at like the top of rogue. I want to see more of this deck before I sort of decide. I do think Naturia is a really solid option, though. I'm really conflicted. Initially, I'm going to put it in rogue. I hope by the time I do my next tier list, I'm able to put this in tier 2, but I think only time will tell on this one. Byssted as an engine, I'm going to put as 1.5, sort of next to Dragon Link. This engine was almost like the whole basis for half of this tier list, it felt like. Like, this engine is so powerful. It's going to be in a lot of places. It's not going to be as good as, say, you know, Kshatriy Law's Fenrir as far as its splashability index. But yeah, now I'm realizing we haven't ranked Kshatriy Law. I'm going to put Kshatriy Law in rogue. I don't think it will be good until, what's the name of the thingamabobber? Until the next set where they get a few more support cards, but Kshatriy Law will be in rogue. I think Byssted is definitely a solid tier 1.5 though. And yeah, this is sort of how I'm going to rank this tier list. Definitely a long one. I definitely talked too much about the decks I said I wasn't going to talk so much about, but there's just so many decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! And this isn't even all of them. Like, I'm still going to get 50 comments of the decks I didn't mention, so feel free to leave those down below so I might add them for the next tier list. But I'm going to have to find a method to sort of, like, talk about the other decks less. But that's it for this tier list. I hope you enjoyed. Tell me down below how you would rank this tier list differently, what you think of the current format going into Darkwing Blast, and things like that. This has been Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.